Oh, hey guys, you might be wondering what I'm doing here with this fake gun. Well, not only is it to get around YouTube age restrictions, but I'm also on the hunt. Metroid Other M has been loose in my house for the last month. I've been keeping an eye out so I can catch it and put it back on my shelf. This game is a cunning bastard, but it's going to take a lot more than just a little distraction to keep me from... Ooh! Oh. If there was any title I was the most curious about making a video for in this marathon, it was for this game. I grew up hearing about the fallout of Metroid Other M, but until this review, I had never experienced the game for myself. My initial disdain towards this game was mostly due to word of mouth. It was unfortunately something that, even to this day, still somewhat affects how I feel about certain titles. I'm trying to be better about it, but it's kind of hard to break that sort of mindset, you know? Jumping back on topic, Other M was one of the most anticipated Metroid games upon its announcement, being revealed at E3 2009, and it initially looked like we were going to be in for something special.
After Zero Mission's release, the series would pretty much be continued exclusively by the Prime series in the mid to late 2000s, thanks to the release of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, Metroid Prime Hunters, Metroid Prime Pinball, and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Like I said, the game was announced at E3 2009, not only being announced after games like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Wii Sports Resort, The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, and Super Mario Galaxy 2, but it was the final announcement in that conference, the one more thing for Nintendo's presentation that year. This game, however, wasn't being developed by Nintendo R&D1. Not only was that because of the studio's lack of experience with 3D titles, but also because this was around the time that they were getting absorbed and moved into other studios at Nintendo. After some time playing Ninja Gaiden, Yoshio Sakamoto would meet up with Team Ninja and request their aid in developing Other M, and from there on, Project M was born. Not that one. From what I understand, this initially left some fans concerned, since Team Ninja was also the developers of the Dead or Alive fighting game series. Regardless, development went on, and the choice was made to make Project M more of an action game, but surprisingly and concerningly, Sakamoto insisted on this game only being controllable with a single Wiimote, no nunchuck, no classic controller, and no GameCube controller. The control wasn't the only thing that Sakamoto had pushed for. This project was his baby. Every design decision, every change, every story beat, every line of dialogue, all was what Sakamoto had wanted as part of his vision, as not only was he the producer and director for Other M, he was also the writer. He even went as far as to direct the English translation and the English dub to make sure everything came out according to his vision, no matter the language. This was without a doubt the most ambitious Metroid game ever released up until that point, and possibly the most ambitious even today.
I'm sure most of the people watching this video are already well aware about Metroid Other M's reputation and are just looking to see what I think about the game. This was one of those games on my gaming bucket list purely because of that reputation alone. Could this game really be as bad as people say it is? Well, we better start with that plot synopsis first, so ladies and gentlemen, let's look at Other M.
We're not progressing the overall story for Metroid, as this game takes place between Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, and begins with Samus reflecting on her mission on Zebes as she's being checked on by a Galactic Federation quarantine team. Once her suit is cleaned up and all good to go, Samus reports the mission accomplished to the GF Council, and I assume she goes off on other bounties? It isn't clear how much time passes since then, but sometime later, Samus answers a distress signal from the Bottle Ship, a remote galactic research vessel somewhere in space. She begins her investigation, soon coming across a Galactic Federation squad who had also answered the distress signal. Among them is Anthony Higgs, a friend of hers from her days in the Federation, and Commander Adam Malkovich, her old CO. Initially, Adam is cold towards Samus, but after a confrontation with this giant bug monster, I assure you, a normal day in Metroid Land, Samus offers her assistance in the team's operation. Adam agrees on the condition that she obeys his orders and refrains from using certain weapons and abilities until he authorizes them, which I'm sure will be a problem whatsoever. Adam assembles the squad for the mission and gives them their tasks. Anthony, Lyle, Maurice, James, KG. Together they are probably gonna die. The bottle ship is split up into 3 major sectors for Samus to explore. Sector 1 is a jungle-themed sector, Sector 2 is predominantly ice-themed, and Sector 3 is a volcanic theme with a desert section here and there. It's sort of like Metroid Fusion, and trust me, that won't be the only time I say that. Samus heads to Sector 1, soon coming across this tiny little creature that doesn't seem to pay Samus much mind. Investigating further into Sector 1 leads her to meet up with the others of Adam's squad in the exam center, which eventually leads her to discovering cybernetically enhanced Zebesian space pirates, suspiciously with the symbol of the Galactic Federation on their chest.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Upon rendezvousing with the team, they discovered that the purpose of the battleship was to conduct research on bioweapons, a big no-no in Federation law, with the person in charge of the research being one Dr. Madeline Bergman. There isn't too much time to think about that though, as the group is soon attacked outside the station by this giant purple lizard thing, which does give the crew some initial trouble, but one blast from Anthony's fuck you gun sends the thing running away like a pussy. Unfortunately, Lyle was killed during the scuffle.
Bad news.
What?
The Dacia Sandero. It's delayed.
Oh no. Anyway, last week...
Samus ends up finding the hollowed out shell of the little birdie thing she ran into earlier, making the deduction that the monster came out of this little thing. She initially heads to Sector 3 to hunt the monster down, but is redirected by Adam to Sector 2 to locate survivors. At first finding the opposite with Maurice's frozen dead body, but soon after she finds the young woman who runs away. Upon catching up to her, Samus tries to calm the woman down, but she's in fear of Samus coming to silence her, implying that Maurice was killed by a soldier in Adam's squad. After a brief encounter with said saboteur, Samus deduces
there was a traitor among us.
She gives the traitor the nickname The Deleter, and Adam once more has Samus head to Sector 3 to continue looking for the creature, only to find a toweled corpse right outside the geothermal power plant. When she investigates inside, she is shocked to learn that the creature was actually Ridley. Yeah, little fucking Tweety bird over here eventually turns into Ridley. That's dumb. Samus is then overcome by her post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is probably the most controversial part of the game. We all know about it at this point, the fact that Samus' parents were brutally murdered by Ridley when she was a child. My problem with this scene isn't the fact that she's having a PTSD attack, it's that she's having it right now. If this was her first encounter with Ridley after the death of her parents, then I'd be perfectly okay with them doing this here, but at this point in the timeline, she's fought and defeated Ridley 5 times. Hell, they did this scene right already in that Zero Mission manga. Samus has a mental shutdown, and even at one point she begs for death, but after some reassurance from the Chozo, she screams her ass off and goes ham on the rest of the chapter. So if they already did it once, why not just call back to that moment where she had her PTSD instead of having it again here? And look, maybe it's because she was under the impression that Ridley couldn't come back after his remains were destroyed on Zebes, but it still doesn't change the fact that this whole scene was handled a bit poorly in my opinion. In fact, most of the story is handled pretty poorly. I'll touch on all of that later, but during her shutdown, Anthony attempts to fight Ridley himself, unfortunately leading to his assumed demise. That snaps Samus out of it, and she proceeds to beat the ever-loving snot out of Ridley, who manages to slip away for the time being. Samus backtracks to the main sector after losing contact with Adam, soon following behind a GF trooper she suspects of being the Deleter, which eventually leads her to run into the woman from earlier. She introduces herself as Madeline Bergman, and sort of goes into an unapologetic plot dump. So it turns out a rogue faction of the Galactic Federation was attempting to make a special forces unit made entirely of bioweapons, modeling the organization after the space pirates. Madeline also reveals to Samus the top secret plan to militarize Metroids as well. How is all this possible? Well, remember how at the beginning of the game those GF scientists cleaned Samus' suit? Well, they ended up scraping all the DNA from various lifeforms and creatures from Samus' suit to build up their bioweapons. That's why creatures native to Zebes have swarmed the ship, that's why the Zebesians are almost all the way there. That's how Ridley managed to come back, and that's also how this Metroid project was the thing to begin with, because they managed to grab the DNA from Samus' suit. To top all of that off, Dr. Bergman reveals that they also created an AI program based off of Mother Brain known as MB that would act as the catalyst for the Federation controlling the Metroids.
Yeah, because let's give Metroid access to AI. It's never steered us wrong before.
Madeline points Samus towards the direction of the hidden Sector 0, the location of the secret Metroid project. Is it just me, or is anyone else getting the strangest feeling of deja vu? Well, Samus does manage to make it to Sector 0, where, surprise surprise, she finds an infant Metroid, which of course reminds her of Jeff. I miss you, son! But she decides to not make the same choice twice and is shot in the back for her efforts. This, for some reason, temporarily disables her power suit, leaving her pretty much defenseless against the now on-the-attack infant Metroid. As it lunges at her, it's shot and frozen thanks to Adam. When she finally comes to, Adam explains that the Sector 0 Metroids may have had their weakness to ice removed, making them pretty much unstoppable. Adam chalks up the baby being frozen to it still being in its larval stage. Adam also reveals that the bottle ship is now on course with GFHQ, and since having the Metroids land in the hands of the rogue faction is a bad no-no, Adam plans on doing as much damage to the sector to have it detached from the ship, which would mean sacrificing himself. Samus tries to beg Adam to let her go instead, but he gives her the mission of defeating Ridley because I guess he doesn't want to, and to locate the survivor in Sector 1's Bioweapon Research Center. The gruff CEO locks himself into Sector 0, and it soon detaches and self-destructs. Alright. So then Samus heads to the Bioweapon Research Center, where she finds the body of James Pierce, pretty much confirming that he was the deleter. I guess. She continues further into the research center and discovers the vacuum-sealed body of Ridley, and she soon stumbles upon the survivor that Adam was talking about. But before she can do anything about it, a Queen Metroid strolls out like she owns the place. With some assistance from the ship's emergency brakes being pulled, Samus is able to best the Queen, and finally manages to talk to the survivor, who turns out is the real Madeline Bergman. The woman who had introduced herself as Madeline Bergman was actually MB in an android body.
What a twist!
She goes on about how MB had begun developing emotions and a soul as the experiments went on, and when it came time to readjust her AI program, she went batshit and torched the whole facility with the bioweapons. From there, MB began cultivating the Metroids in Sector 0 as part of her plan to seek revenge on the Galactic Federation. It's at this point that MB shows up with a gun. I'm sorry, that's just really silly. You have a powerful android who can control space pirates, and she comes at the two of them with a gun. That's the equivalent of giving Ganondorf a pocket knife. Like, what are they really going to do with that? Turns out, nothing, as soon after, Federation troopers show up, leading to a shootout with these massive creatures, and after anticlimactically pointing at MB, she's taken out for good. Samus is then led out of the bottle ship by a GF trooper who turns out to be Anthony. Turns out he survived his fall in the pyrosphere, and was the one who pulled the emergency brakes on the bottle ship. And from there, Samus and Anthony take Madeline to GFHQ, and... oh, that's it. Wow, that's... closure. After the credits, Samus heads back to the bottle ship to grab something she left behind. With most of the bottle ship cleared out, there isn't much to fight aside from these monsters behind powerbomb doors. But as she travels closer to her destination, she gets into an encounter with Phantoon. Okay, pause. Out of everything they could have replicated from Zebes, they chose Ridley and Phantoon along with other space pirates. These dipshits got what was coming to them. Well, with all that out of the way, Samus heads back to the main sector to grab Adam's helmet in an admittedly sweet moment. That is immediately disregarded with a self-destruct sequence. Thanks for that, guys. Samus escapes the exploding bottle ship and flies off to her next adventure. I will say that a lot of the ideas that Other M has for its story aren't too bad, actually. But how it's all done in the game is just... mediocre. Whether it's the deleter subplot, the overall dialogue, everything with MB and the bioweapon conspiracy, how everything connects together, it's just not good. Topping things off being Samus and Adam's relationship. How nice is it to just take two prominent characters in the series and just burn their reputation with one fucking game? There is so much blatant disregard in this for previous events in the franchise and things that were established less than a decade before this game's release. So in the Zero Mission manga, we're shown that Samus left to be an independent bounty hunter on good terms with the Federation, but Other M reestablishes that Samus actually left on bad terms. Shortened to the point, there was a mission involving Adam's brother that went south, leaving Adam to make the hard choice of leaving his brother behind. Samus didn't initially see it like that and just left in a little hissy fit. Do they ever get the opportunity to talk things out during the game? No! They don't talk about a damn thing, and that really bothers me. Throughout the game, Samus constantly talks about how she keeps Adam's opinion above all others, or how she wonders what Adam thinks of this situation or that situation, but nothing is ever said or shown from Adam's side. Samus just feels reduced to being a Kohai archetype, desperately yearning for the approval from Adam. I felt nothing when this man bit the bullet, because this sacrifice was not earned whatsoever, because this was the only time they decided to talk things out one-on-one, and it still feels like nothing gets resolved. Would it have hurt to set like 5 or 10 minutes aside from them to just talk things out? Also, Adam is only able to sacrifice himself because he shot Samus in the back with a Metroid in front of her on the attack. Like, what she sees in Adam, I have no fucking idea. But ultimately, this game poorly handled the characterization of Adam, and especially Samus. While I am happy that this is the first game in the series to attempt going into who she is as a character, it spends so much time establishing backstory that just wasn't a thing previously. I think this game's story would have been much better if it was set before Zero Mission. Sure, you'd have to rework some parts of the narrative, but things like her PTSD with Ridley and maybe her relationship with Adam would have been better received. But this game takes place between Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, near the end of the fucking timeline. Things that this game attempts to do should have been done in earlier games. Hell, why didn't they cover some of this stuff in Zero Mission? Most of Samus' time is spent just monologuing to herself, whether it's about Adam, the baby Metroid from Super, Ridley, the events on Zebes, and the entire time she goes on with this super theatrical dialogue that just leaves me uninterested. She's the central character. but aside from killing a few bosses here and there, she barely contributes anything to her own fucking game. She doesn't resolve the stuff with the deleter, MB does that. She doesn't destroy the Metroids in Sector 0, that's Adam. She doesn't even get to take out Ridley herself, the Queen Metroid does that. She has very minimal impact on the overall story. She takes orders and explores the ship. That's her contribution. I hate what they did to Samus in this game, and her portrayal in Other M would have rippling consequences for her characterization that last even to games being released 15 plus years after this title's debut. And the game is nowhere near subtle with its themes about maternity. Like, for God's sake, we're on the bottle ship. The distress signal Samus responds to is called Baby's Cry. You have the mother and daughter relationship between Madeline and MB, Samus' fixation on the baby Metroid, and the fact that you can rearrange the title to spell out mother. It's about as obvious as Captain America's Shmi. Overall, this game just gives a scattered mess of a story with unfocused characters and subplots. It doesn't care about events that came before it, and at the end of it, we're left with a title that assassinates the character of one of my favorite protagonists of all time. It also retroactively makes Fusion's story worse because of what they did with Adam, and that always bothers me when they do that in games. I mean, if there's any positive I can give, it's probably Anthony. He seems like a good chum to Samus, and I genuinely hope we get to see him again someday.
The story is by far the worst aspect of Other M. It's the main contributing factor as to why the game has the online reputation that it has, but if you were to push all of that aside and just look at the gameplay by itself, you might find something halfway decent buried underneath.
Setting the story aside now, the actual gameplay of Other M isn't perfect, but for the first non-Prime 3D Metroid game, I thought this was a solid attempt. If I can compare it to something, you know how Super Mario 3D Land and 3D World are 2D Mario games that play like 3D Mario games? Think of it like that, but for Other M. Samus is still plenty mobile, and by the time you get to the end of the game, her arsenal packs the same punch as it always does. The biggest hurdle to get over is how you control Samus. As I've established earlier, you can only control Samus with a single Wiimote. No control stick whatsoever. At first it felt really awkward controlling a 3D game with a D-pad, but considering what this game has you do, I think it works fine for the most part. Samus' shots will home in on enemies, so you don't really have to focus too hard on aiming, and she has some new abilities to make combat easier. The most obvious one during playtime is the new Sense move. I like to think of it like the dodging in, say, Kirby in the Forgotten Land, only this one is activated by just hitting a direction on the D-pad to dodge. Most of the time you're activating it by accident though, so at least for me, my dodges rarely feel intentional. Still, I found it saving me more often than not. She can also quickly build up a charge shot during dodges, and using these in boss fights felt super satisfying. She also has the new Overblast, letting you jump onto an enemy's head and blast them to Kingdom Come. That is satisfying. All of these aspects lead to overall a satisfying, if somewhat wonky combat system. However, there were a few times where trying to hit enemies felt a bit aimless.
Use the sights.
Is there a fuck go back button? Yeah, the game features a first-person mode as a sort of callback to the Prime series, but the execution of it is poor overall. If you want to enter first-person mode, you have to point the Wiimote at the screen. From there, you can lock on the targets to hit with charge shots, use a grapple beam to swing from different points, and it's also the only way to use missiles. Now, granted, missiles are still pretty powerful in this game, but when you're trying to use them in the middle of combat, you're a sitting duck. Samus can't move in first person, so you gotta commit when you want to fire a missile. This wouldn't be a big problem if there weren't enemies you needed to kill with missiles like these douchebags at the end of the game. One major difference from past games is the fact that enemies no longer drop health or ammo pickups, so you only have specific opportunities to refill your health. You could do so either at one of the game's many save rooms, and trust me, there's a lot of save rooms, or if you're in critical condition, you can bring the Wiimote up like this and press the A button to go into concentration mode, which restores a few tanks and all your missiles. I like using this after brief enemy encounters, but it was kind of rough trying to find a good spot to use this during boss fights. As far as the structure of the game itself, think of it like a 3D Metroid Fusion. You have a few different sectors based on different environments, and you're always being shown where you need to go. It's not entirely like Fusion though, as while that game did let you sort of choose your own route to get your destination, Other M is much more linear in design. Unless you're doing cleanup for items, you're not really going off the beaten path for main story beats. I will say that I was surprised to see my usual curiosity be rewarded with small pickups. It felt about as rewarding finding upgrades as other Metroid games, but that's only really for the smaller pickups. Because in a horrible example of story and gameplay integration, Samus gets her major upgrades through the authorization system. So by technicality, Samus already has most of her major upgrades from Super Metroid in her arsenal, with the exception of the high jump, the spacer beam, and the X-ray scope. When Adam lets Samus join for the mission, he has her deactivate all of her upgrades and abilities and will reauthorize them when he sees fit. He mainly does this to maintain the safety of his team. I get disabling things like power bombs for the time being, but why on God's green earth did Samus disable her Varia suit? That isn't hurting anyone last time I checked. The first visit to Sector 3 genuinely pissed me off. You got Dipshit 1 running around Sector 3 without her various suit taking unnecessary heat damage, and then you got Dipshit 2 who doesn't authorize it until a room or two before she leaves the sector. I get that they don't want you having your abilities right from the start, but in the context of the story, why not just have some of these available right away? It just makes Samus look so fucking stupid.
Oh, you stupid son of a bitch.
Because of the authorization system, there isn't any joy in finding something like a Chozo statue or a data room to get your next ability. It isn't so much, yay, I can use the plasma beam, but rather, finally, I can use the plasma beam. To the game's credit, Samus' returning kit works like it should. I was kinda surprised to see the speed booster and shine spark in this game. This was something I figured was going to be kind of hard to translate to 3D, and it wasn't a power-up the Prime series attempted to do either. But I think they found a way to stay true to what these abilities are without designing it in a way that would break the game. And when you get the space jump and screw attack near the end of the game, it makes some smaller encounters a breeze, just like it does in the older games. You know, credit where credit's due. There are actually 2 new upgrades that Samus gets in the game after getting through specific enemy encounters. The first is the Diffusion Beam, which increases the size of your charge shot explosion. I tell you, there's nothing more satisfying than charging up a charge shot and then blasting a group of enemies into oblivion. There's also the Seeker Missile from the Prime series. You can lock onto multiple targets and fire missiles simultaneously at them, and I'll be honest, this felt worthless outside of the few times it was necessary for progression. I don't know if that's how it was in the Prime games, but I wasn't too impressed with this one, honestly. Aside from getting your main abilities via the authorization mechanic, Samus can find your usual missile tanks, energy tanks, pieces of energy tanks, as well as things like the E-recovery tanks that increase how much energy tanks get restored during concentration, and these Excel charges that reduce the amount of time it takes Samus to charge the charge beam. The item pickup sound is lame if I can nitpick about something small here. It's just a dull and lifeless... As far as the actual exploration and moment-to-moment gameplay goes, it's fine. There are a lot of enemy encounters in this game. Most of them were fine, but some of these assholes can be damage sponges like these tree-like enemies here. And then these enemies hiding behind the power bomb doors in the last part of the game can fuck themselves. If you don't kill them the right way, they hide in their shells and regenerate back to full health, and you can't use something like power bombs to take them out either. Oh, speaking of power bombs, let's touch on some general bullshit for a second. While there are a lot of things that Other M does with the gameplay that I enjoy, it also has plenty of shit that drives me up a wall. First up, we got these first-person pixel hunts. There are moments during the story where Samus will have to look around for a specific thing to progress the narrative, whether it's some blood or a logo, so on and so forth. Most of these things are fucking frustrating because the game is never clear on what you should be looking at, and most of these things are way too small to notice. Sometimes I just got lucky when my cursor hovered over my objective. Trying to find the lava spout in the pyrosphere was a pain in the ass, because not only are you trying to look for it in a wide open space in the dark, but Ridley is spewing out flames at you constantly, and if you get hit, you're backed out of first person mode. It pulls that shit too when I'm trying to use the Seeker Missile in this room full of Rinkas. God, these bastards hit hard in this game. There's also a lot of these moments where Samus will just start walking slowly through some specific areas. These moments are in service to the story, but since I hate the story, I grew annoyed by these bits very quickly. I already mentioned the Sector 3 shit. Before you even get to that point, there's one point where you're going over the Skyway Bridge to get further into the sector, only for this lava monster to jump out and... oh, that's just a game over. It took me too long to figure this part out. I tried going slow, didn't work. I tried going even slower, didn't work. Turns out you have to use your sense move to dodge it, which I call horseshit on, because any other time I needed to use one of the new abilities introduced in this game, I was given a pop-up. So they just decided not to do it here? Yeah, thanks assholes. And during the fight with the Queen Metroid at the end of the game, Samus grapples into her stomach and blasts her with a power bomb. The only problem is that the game doesn't give you a prompt to use the power bomb because you were never authorized to use it. Keep in mind the last time you used a power bomb would be at the beginning of the game 10 hours ago. So, by the time you figure out that you have to use a power bomb, you quickly try to remember how to use it, and then you die because you start charging it too late. The game gives you pop-ups constantly that remind you how certain abilities work, but then it decides to do this pick and choose shit, and that especially pisses me off. The game isn't afraid to hold your hand, but it will throw you to the wolves during these do or die moments, and that's so stupid. If there's one thing about the design of the game I can genuinely praise, it's the boss fights. Some of them aren't the most engaging, and maybe some of them shouldn't even be considered true bosses, but the big guys with the health bars are what I'm worried about, and they sure fucking deliver. I think the only boss I didn't like was with the second form for Ridley, because you're pinned down in first person mode and have to do this dumb back and forth shit with his tail. I love how cinematic the Gyagma fight is in Sector 3. Getting to run up the thing's arm and neck to deliver a charge shot in the fucking face, that is so satisfying. The fight with the Deleter's mech theme was mostly Dodge and Weave City, but it was still a fun enough encounter. Vorash wasn't too bad of a fight either, but I'd say this was probably the most standard boss fight in the game. I loved the fight against Ridley in the Pyrosphere though. The music along with how aggressive he is just culminates for one of the best fights with him in the series. I was kind of surprised to see Nightmare from Fusion here, but I'm not the biggest fan of having to fight him twice. The Queen Metroid fight, powerbomb shit aside, was okay enough, though the Metroid she spawns were super aggressive and that did get a little annoying. Phantoon was a great surprise though. I didn't think he'd ever get the final boss upgrade, but it was a really fun encounter. I've done a lot of bitching about this game, but let me get some positives out. Again, I think for the most part they adapted the gameplay from the 2D entries really well into 3D, and as much as I know they'll probably never revisit this style again, I'd love for them to give it a second chance. I think the character and environment design is pretty good. It feels like the quality we should be getting for a premium Metroid game. The graphics overall look great for the Wii, ranking right up there with games like Super Mario Galaxy, Sonic Colors, and Skyward Sword. I only ran into a bit of slowdown here and there, mostly when there was a lot of projectiles on screen. I think the cutscene direction and overall style for this game is fantastic. Despite most of, if not all the story moments falling flat, I do think that they are at least framed and paced decently well. The voice acting, however, is atrocious. Long before the days of modern Fire Emblem and Zelda voice acting, Other M's overall cast performance is bad. Samus sounds like an Alexa who lost Wi-Fi halfway through her script read. I mean no disrespect towards Samus's actress for this game, Jessica Aaron Martin, or any of the cast members for that matter. From what I understand, this was the direction that Sakuma wanted, and it clearly doesn't land. Musically speaking, it's poor. Aside from like one or two remixes of previous themes from older games, the music is generic and not that memorable, which kills me to say that about a Metroid game. Well, at least Ridley's theme in this game is incredible, and I can listen to it without him screaming in my ear like he's got his dick stuck in a bear trap. Metroid Other M is a game that I have no strong feelings towards one way or the other. It is a game that does what it sets out to do, in which a majority of it is not very good. The main gameplay style itself is fine, and there were a few points where I caught myself and noticed that I was having a good time. There's some decent level design, the cinematography is really well done, and the bosses were, for the most part, pretty fun. But everything else this game attempts to do holds it down and overall leads to a rather middling experience, being held back especially by the awkward method controlling Samus, the absurd authorization system, the lack of common courtesy for certain in-game moments, and this fucking story. It makes for a rather uneventful adventure. Other M is by all means not a bad game, but it's probably one of the worst Metroid games. And hey, if you really like this game, then more power to you. I myself am just apathetic towards it.
I'd like to think that I came out of this a bit more positive than I thought I was going to originally, but I don't know, after all of it, I still just feel kind of miffed. I don't think that this is a bad game. Trust me, there are much worse games out there. But sometimes a game can seem worse when it leaves this much of a bad taste in your mouth. Thankfully, the next game we're going to look at is not only the equivalent of much needed mouthwash, but it's also the last game in the Metroid Marathon, and it happens to be one of the best in the series. So the next time we meet, we'll be taking a look at the latest mainline entry in the series, Metroid 5, Metroid Dread. And if there's any positive takeaway I can give after playing Other M, I do at least own this game physically. And no corporation on the planet can take it away from me. So with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching, buy physical media, and I'll see you all again soon.